the misery and pain of people, it also offers them the hope of being raised up. Now, I don't think that you can adequately engage the pain and the misery of the majority of people who are experiencing that kind of trauma through the Latin Mass. And I think it's fair to say that the majority of people that I know who go to the Latin Mass would tend to be highly educated, fairly well off, fur coats, BMWs, and Dickie Bow Brigade.
That, I think he's talking about you, Kieran Wood.
I think he must be. I don't know about the fur coat or the big car, the Dickie Bow, maybe. But certainly if he'd ever been to the Mass, he'd see, we have, for example, blind people who come along to our Mass. There are young people who come along to the Mass, people with young children who come along to the Mass. And while what Father Sean says is all very worthy, it's inaccurate almost from beginning to end. I mean, he talks about Jesus facing the people at the Last Supper. Jesus sat on the same side of the table as most of the people at the Last Supper, and he led them in prayer in the same way that the priest in the Tridentine Rite leads the people in prayer, facing towards the east, towards the direction of the heavenly Jerusalem. He said that Jesus spoke the language of the people. When Jesus was in the synagogue, Jesus spoke Hebrew. He spoke the language which was the, if you like, the ritual language of the Jews, in the same way that other religions have ritual languages that they use, in the same way that our Eastern rites in the Catholic Church use Eastern languages like Old Slavonic and so on. And Latin is a language which has been used...
What's your point about him speaking Hebrew, Jesus speaking Hebrew? So that was the vernacular at the time.
No, it wasn't the vernacular at the time. No, Aramaic. Aramaic was the vernacular at the time. Yes, he was using a ritual language in church. And I mean, the point is that for 1,500 years, people were perfectly capable, the old and the sick and those that Father Sean's talking about, were perfectly happy to go to this Mass, because this Mass has been unchanged since the time of Gregory the Great in the 6th century. You have 1,500 years of almost unchanged liturgy, and then all of a sudden you have an absolute total revolution which has led to a complete emptying of the churches. And in fact, one church in point is the Church of St. Michael's and John's on the Quays, which was served by Father John's Franciscans. They couldn't get anyone in there. They stopped saying public masses. We went in there for our first Tridentine Mass, and the church was so full you literally couldn't get into the church. What did the authorities in Dublin do? They closed it down and they sold it to be a Viking museum.
Sean Castle, anything like that? Is that true?
I think, yeah, I actually said Mass in Michael and John's. I was one among the last to do that. It was, I remember it as a small, pokey, rather damp, unpleasant place to say Mass. But apart from that, can I just take Kieran's point about young people coming to Mass? I see a survey in the Sunday Times yesterday which says that 2/3 of people in Ireland, of young people under 30, are no longer coming to Mass. And I don't think that the future is in creating a kind of an exclusive liturgy or in a return to the 1,500 years of history. Since 1965, when the vernacular came in, which is a long time ago, it was some kind of an attempt to engage in a liturgy that was relevant to the people. I don't think that even in our Catholic churches we have gone far enough with that relevance or in making it relevant. And I don't think going back into the past is in any way going to rejuvenate or give some hope for the future in relation to Mass, speaking to people's lives. And it's certainly not touching that 2/3 of young people mentioned in the survey who never go to church or have no interest in Mass.
Well, in the Archdiocese of Dublin now, you will be aware that last year the Diocesan Seminary didn't get one single vocation, not one.
Are you suggesting that if they said Mass in Latin it would make a difference?
We had a vocation last year. We had a priest ordained in fact, he was ordained for the Fraternity of St. Peter, and he was ordained in Canada. But he was a young man who was studying at Trinity College, who first came to know the Tridentine Mass here while he was at Trinity. He went off to study for the priesthood. He was ordained last year, and he came back, and the Archbishop of Dublin came to his Mass.
Are you seriously suggesting that the problem of vocations in the Catholic Church would be resolved if Mass was said under the old rite, old Latin rite, rather than in the vernacular?
I am suggesting that the problem of vocations would be partly resolved if there were a return to a sense of the sacred in the church, and it weren't just seen as a social club.
Why does the sacred, surely there's something suspicious about the sacred if it has to be expressed in a language that nobody understands?
Well, one of the reasons that the sacred is expressed in a language that nobody understands, or rather, not a language that nobody understands because we have missals, but a language that's a dead language, is because the sacred, supposing you used a word, for example, 40 or 50 years ago in the liturgy, used the word gay about God, it would have had an entirely different meaning 50 years ago from the meaning it has today. I mean, we don't talk about gay vestments, but we might have done 50 years ago. With Latin, you don't have any change. In the new Mass, for example, let me take one particular point. In the new Mass, you have in the consecration of the chalice, you have the words, "This is my blood which will be shed for you and for all." That doesn't appear in any translation of the Bible, as you no doubt know, Vincent, from your biblical programs. The Christ said, "My blood will be shed for you and for many." And the Council of Trent and theologians know quite well why he said that. The point is that once you start changing the Mass into English and letting people say what they like, the whole of the...
And only in one of the 4 Gospels did he say, "Do this in remembrance of me."
There you are. In fact, it's an amalgam of the two Gospels.
One would have to be suspicious about his intention to set up a ceremony of the Eucharist at all.
I think that we might be straying beyond...
All right, right. Let's go back to the question I asked you. Why is there not something suspicious about the sacred if it depends on the use of a language that most people don't understand?
For Catholics, what the Mass is the representation of the sacrifice of Calvary, which is something that is totally beyond our understanding. The idea that a man can stand up there and bring Christ, body, blood, soul and divinity down, change bread and wine into the body, blood, soul and divinity of Christ, of God. And that whole idea is something that is totally beyond our comprehension. So to have a liturgy which in a sense is beyond our comprehension, which is rich in colour and in the theatricals of the liturgy, in the smells of the incense, in the beautiful music, and in the language, apart from the unchangeability of the language, are things which perhaps represent and reflect the transcendence of what the Mass is.
Sean Cassidy, is he not just
bringing God down? A man bringing God down, please. And God doesn't have to be brought down. God is here. He's in me. He's even in Vincent. He's in us. He's here. I'm not bringing him down as a priest on the altar. God is already present. The worshipping people might in some way make that manifest. And if I'm presiding,
that is heresy. That is heresy.
Well, in your book.
No, I would hope that the Archbishop or indeed the head of the Franciscans would be doing something about it.
The other thing I wanted to say in relation to this is that, with very good reason, Vatican II brought in a vernacular Mass, and one of the purposes of it was in order to promote a greater understanding between the Christian families. And we have arrived at a situation now where the Mass in English is somewhat akin to the services in our Christian brothers in the Protestant churches and in the Methodist churches and in many of the other churches. And I'd just like to draw a point made by Robin Eames yesterday, that in relation to sectarianism, he said that it is the greatest sin and the greatest obstacle to full understanding of Christian love in Ireland. I would see this return back into a kind of Catholic Roman enclave, that is the Latin Mass, as contributing to that kind of exclusivity that is the breeding ground of sectarianism.
Well, can I get Anne Looney in? Where do you stand on all this, Anne?
I don't have any memory of the Latin Mass, although I have been to the Latin Mass in the old rite. I found it very theatrical, and I found it extremely spooky, to use that word in all that negative sense. I found it spooky.
Why?
And I found it, I had no idea what was happening. I could not understand. I don't have any Latin, apart from the odd bits of singing that I would have done as a young person. I didn't understand what was going on. There was, at no stage did I feel part of or present to anything other than something that was very esoteric and belonged only to the people who were inside the altar rails. And I just think that associating the sense of the sacred, and I do think the sense of the sacred is problematic in today's society, and in the church. But I think part of that reason is because in order to have a sense of the sacred...
I have no idea what it means.
Well, you mentioned at the very start, Vincent, you said there was a sense which the Mass became very ordinary for people. Now, for me, one of the reasons I go to Mass, and people that I know go, is because they want to have sense made of their ordinary lives, right? And in a sense, coming to listen to the readings are a very important part of the Mass. The homily, although of dubious quality at times, can be very good.
Listen to the readings, the sanitized extracts from the Bible.
Well, yesterday we had the reading from Jonah and Nineveh, and I must say I found a very good explanation given by the priest who was celebrating Mass. Admittedly, not in Dublin, but a very good explanation, and I found it very edifying. And there was good music, and I came away with a sense that this was a community that was looking for and finding meaning in worshipping together.
Could I didn't find that when I went to the Latin Mass. Rising from what Sean Caston said a moment ago, that what is essentially at the core of the Mass is really so difficult for people to understand or perhaps believe. that it should be better expressed in Latin than in English, for there would be at least a distance. You're not confronted with the implausibility of it if presented in the vernacular.
Yeah, but I mean, at the heart of the Mass, from my understanding of it, is the mystery of the incarnation, where God became human in all that means. And surely human beings' lives and their words and their actions, in whatever way they express those, are an important part of that. And I think people understand that. And I think even young people I've worked with over the years who would never have crossed a church doorstep from the time they had made their first communion or confirmation, at times when they felt that their life was losing meaning, often found it in coming to Mass, or coming to a liturgy, or be it a funeral, be it something that happened in their lives, and they did find that meaningful.
What would they find meaningful?
Well, I think Sean was talking about brokenness and finding a meaning in it, and I think people did get something. I think that is part of the mystery of the Eucharist, that people can be moved by it.
How can somebody find meaning in a mystery? I can't understand that. Well, surely there's a contradiction in terms.
Well, let me give you an example. I, not so long ago, had a funeral of a family of a young man who was 18 who died of an overdose, right? And his parents were there at the Mass, right, who were totally distraught, didn't know he was on drugs, were totally in shock by the whole trauma of it, right? And apart from creating a ritual around that which brings some kind of comfort and healing to people, she came up to me afterwards and she said, "Isn't it funny, all the years I go to Mass, I never heard the words of the consecration with the same meaning as I did now. When you said, 'Take this and eat it, this is my body which is given for you. This is my body which is given for you.'" She said, "I looked at my son's body as I saw it in the morgue, right? I looked at the body of Jesus as it was on the cross and made present on the altar. And suddenly my son's dying made some sense."
What was that?
What was the sense? You don't see the sense.
No.
In that the death of this young man, right, was in some way
tragedy.
Was a terrible tragedy. I agree, as indeed the death of Jesus in many ways was tragic and was awful, was horrible, probably one of the most awful ways to die, right? Far worse even than this woman's, right? But Jesus, before he died, went to the trouble of saying, "This is my body. This death is going to happen, right? And I give it for you." So somehow there's still the mystery of the dying and the terrible tragedy of it, and that we don't understand. But at the same time, Jesus was able to give it some meaning, that it is for us, that it in some way brings us to God. It is part of what God is among us. Is that any use to you, Vincent?
Father, let's just deal with one. Why does the Mass being celebrated in the Latin Tridentine rite have more meaning for you and for those who attend this ceremony on Sundays? Why does that have more meaning than the Mass said in English under the new rite?
There are several aspects to that. There's the Mass, the fact that the Mass is in Latin. There's the fact of the orientation of the priest, in that all the congregation face the same direction. The priest leads the faithful in prayer. There's the fact that it speaks unbroken tradition stretching back 1500 years, which is about the duration of Christianity in this country. It's
what? I don't see why that should be a persuasive reason for continuing. The fact that it's been there since the time of Pope Gregory.
I think one of the reasons is that you don't get the personality of the priest showing in the old rite, because the rubrics are very precise. You don't get what you had, for example, in one occasion on All Ireland Day in the Pro Cathedral, where the priest came out in his green vestments. "I won't keep you long, lads. I know you have important things to be going to, and the fact that I'm wearing green doesn't mean I'm supporting one of the sides today." There's none of that sort of tosh, and there's none of the political correctness. Yesterday in Merrion
You think that was politically correct?
That wasn't politically correct, but political correctness,
turn your back to people. What's the significance of turning your back?
The significance is not turning your back to them. The significance is leading them, because the priest leads the people in prayer in the old rite. Yesterday, what I was going to say was, when I was at Mass in Merrion Road, the priest decided he would change the words of the Gospel from I will make you fishers of men, to I will make you fishers of people. We don't have that sort of political correctness where people are changing the words as they feel like it, standing up, sitting down, saying, listen, lads, we won't say the credo today.
You're quite happy with the misogyny of the Bible, are you?
I'm quite happy with the rite of the old Mass as it is.
You're quite happy with the misogyny of the Bible?
I'm certainly happy. I'm certainly happy that St. Paul shouldn't be corrupted and have pieces taken out of St. Paul as it is in the new Mass. The readings about St. Paul from St. Paul to the Corinthians are read in full at the old Mass. They don't tuck bits out because they upset people. The Bible is the Bible. And the other thing I'd say, just to make it clear, because one of the things Anne suggested was that people might not understand. People who go to St. Aldwyn's to Mass have a booklet available to them on the inside of the door, which has the Latin on one side and the English on the other. Everybody has that available. And the other thing that people should understand is that the homily and the readings in the old Mass are in English. Yes. The sermon is in English, the readings are in English. It's not as if it's all just...
You don't insist the sermon be in Latin as well, no?
Very good, Vincent.
I think the notion of, and one of the things that made the experience quite theatrical for me was having the priest with his back to the people. I think that it may be heresy according to Kieran, but I do think that God is present in the people who assemble together.
I didn't say it was heresy.
I think that that the priest, who his job is presider over the assembly, he gathers people together, and I think I like the symbolism of it, and I think others like the symbolism.
And symbolism of which?
Of people gathering together. We don't gather very often anymore as a people. Our sense of community is, I think, becoming less and less, and moments when people gather together for worship are important, and I think the priest facing the people, gathering people together, gives a sense that their ordinary lives are gathered into the church on a Sunday, and I like that. Yes, I certainly agree the kind of comments like, okay lads, I won't keep you long, we can do without, but I think the notion of the priest gathering people together makes their ordinary lives extraordinary, and I think that to me is at the heart of the incarnation and the heart of what happens at Eucharist.
Okay, we have Mary Lowry on the line. Hello, Mary. Hello, Mary.
Hello, Vincent. Yes, I'm here.
You want to comment on this, Mary?
Yes, I do, because I really like to go back to something that Father Sean Casson said, and I'm really amused that I have been able to go into Mass in St. Aldwyn's and in the centre of Dublin for the last 10 years, and I've only ever been driving Nissan Micra, and I certainly haven't got a fur hat.
Do you wear a dicky bow?
Oh, I don't wear a dicky bow either. No.
Okay.
So the thing is,
don't qualify under any of the headlines.
Well, I certainly don't qualify in the fact that our 27-year-old son comes with us, and he certainly isn't a Trinity graduate. He actually has Down syndrome, so we can't put him amongst the elitist of the educated. And he really does enjoy coming to Mass. And the thing is,
does he enjoy going to Mass in the vernacular? Said in the vernacular?
Not very much, no. I took him recently, and he was distinctly edgy about the whole thing. And recently, when my daughter took him to a local Mass, he said, "This is boring." Now, what I think he finds in the Latin Mass is the sense of order that is in it. It is always the same. The Mass never changes. And people with mental handicaps and learning difficulties do seem to like this sense of the sameness of things, and it gives them some reassurance. And then I think besides that too, Father was talking earlier on about people being touched, and the Latin Mass doesn't touch them to the core of their being. It does, because it touches every part of them. It touches all their senses. To start with, I think you can feel the reverence of the people when you go in. I don't find that spooky. I find that very great reverence there. Then there's a lot of beauty.
But you don't find people couldn't be reverent if the Mass is said in English, could they not?
People certainly can be very reverent.
But you wouldn't feel the reverence, is it?
Yeah, you might do, but on the other hand, if you're so much often taken up with the personality of the priest during the Mass, in that sense, if the priest isn't saying Mass reverently, then there isn't a sense of reverence. We look to the priest to lead us, as Kieran said. He is there leading us forward in prayer. Then I think with the prayers, you've got vestments are nice, there's colour, there's candles, there's flowers, and all this, is good visually for somebody with a learning difficulty. And then music.
But there's colour and candles and flowers and all that in the churches where Mass is said in the vernacular.
Exactly, but we have it too. I mean, it's not that different. I mean, we still have these beautiful things as well. The music Luke has got used to, he can join in the hymns. Then another thing that we do have more in the Latin Mass is incense. quite a lot of it's sometimes a bit overpowering because we're in the front row, but that, with the sense of the smell, you do get this feeling that this is something special and this is something holy. And then when you come down to perhaps a sense of taste at the very end, Holy Communion is always a high point for him. He really waits to go to Holy Communion and finds no difficulty in kneeling down and receiving on his tongue.
To what extent are the pyrotechnics, Kieran Wood, important in the Tridentine Mass?
I think they're probably quite important. I mean, the sense of the smoke raising the prayers up to God. A lot of the prayers in the Tridentine Mass reflect those sort of things. It's not just, for example, the beauty of the Mass, but it's things like, for example, the colour of the vestments. If you've gone to a funeral Mass, a Requiem Mass in a Tridentine Mass, you'll find that the vestments are black, which talks about sin, whereas in the new church, they're white. You go along and priests talk about, that person's gone to heaven. I don't want priests saying, I've gone to heaven when I die. I'd rather people prayed for me than assumed I went to heaven, probably like yourself, Vincent. And the other thing about the old rite is that, for example, you have all the beautiful ceremonies of Holy Week, you have the beautiful ceremonies of Palm Sunday and so on. You have things like the midnight masses where you have the church completely dark and the priest raising the candle which represents Christ at Easter and everyone taking a light off it and gradually the whole church coming alight with the candles. You have that sort of symbolism which is reflected throughout the whole of the church year, and we only have a 12-month cycle in the old rite, not the 3-year cycle.
Some of your people from the Tridentine Mass organising our Millennium celebrations. We'll be talking to more people about the Tridentine Mass after the break. Welcome back. We go to Father James Buckley, who is in Pennsylvania in America, and he's involved with the movement for the reintroduction of the Tridentine Mass. He's a priest, the priestly fraternity of St. Peter's in Pennsylvania. Father Buckley, has the Latin Mass had much of a revival in the United States?
Yes, the Latin Mass has had quite a revival in the United States. In 1988, when the indult was granted, there were only 8 places in our entire country where one could go to the Mass every Sunday. Today, there are more than 130.
And are many people going?
Well, look, that's a very good question that you asked. Now, you have to realize that for 30 years, there was a propaganda machine. Every diocesan newspaper told us that the Novus Ordo was the answer to everything.
What was the answer to everything?
The Novus Ordo was the great answer.
What's the Novus Ordo?
The Novus Ordo is the Mass you're talking about, the one in the vernacular.
Okay.
Okay? That's the official term. Now, because it was such a propaganda machine, it is disconcerting to those who are advancing this new ordo to see that people nonetheless desire, some people, and that's in, well, that many, but some people desire the old Mass. And this is an extraordinary thing. You have people who never saw the old Mass, but prefer to go to it, primarily because of the reverence. That's that point.
Okay, what's the next point?
Well, okay, you mentioned about 4 or 5 things. First thing on your program that I would say is, what's the big deal? The Holy Father in said that people who are attached to this Mass should have it, and that the bishops throughout the world should be very generous in granting them their desire. That's the first thing. Second thing, regarding the Mass is the sacrifice, the sacrifice of Christ himself to the glory of God the Father. It's not therapy for men. It's something that we are privileged to join with Christ in offering to God. It is mysterious because we cannot possibly comprehend all that is taking place. The other thing, I think it's an extraordinary thing that the Gregorian Mass, going all the way back, actually goes back to St. Gelasius in the year 496, that Mass has perdured for 1,500 years, and it was only interrupted, I might say, by the act of Pope Paul VI himself. The Mass that we now have today is not the Mass that came out of the Second Vatican Council. The Mass that came out of the Second Vatican Council was the Mass of 1965. The Mass that, the Novus Ordo, the new order of Mass that you see in your churches today, is the fruit of the 1969 Missal, something that was called into being by Pope Paul VI. Those were the things I wanted to mention.
Okay, we have Valerie Nestor on the line. Hello, Valerie.
Hello there, Vincent. the first thing that happened to me was I went on the famous walking pilgrimage from Paris to Chartres. I've gone there 4 times. It's 70 miles from Paris to Chartres, and there are thousands of young people on that, and I just couldn't believe it when I saw all these young men, mainly, because the Scout movement of France is the backbone of this pilgrimage, mostly under 25, and when you saw the veneration that they gave
What's
to the
this
Mass.
Paris to Chartres event?
It's a Pentecost, every Pentecost, and it's from Notre Dame in Paris to Notre Dame in Chartres, a pilgrimage, a yearly pilgrimage.
What's this got to do with Latin Mass?
Because that's what they say there. That's what they say. They say the Latin Mass, and as I say, that's how I got interested in it first, you know. So when I came back here then and sort of hunted around, and I found it was on in Dublin, and I've gone there a couple of times, and I've also gone down to Cork. But I would see it, Father Buckley expressed it there, what I would say is the sacrifice is really evident in the old Mass, which doesn't seem to have the same importance, in my opinion, in the new Mass. And I would also say there's far greater respect for the office of the priesthood in the old Mass. I think that's one of the problems that we're having with the vocations today, really, that the office of the priesthood, unfortunately, as the priests, a lot of the priests displayed in the new Mass, somehow or other, the example isn't bringing the young people to join, you know.
Okay, Aunt Looney,
yeah.
What is the objection? And if people want to attend Mass, or priests want to say Mass in the old rite and in Latin, why not let them at it if that's what they want?
I don't personally have any problem, but I'd be worried if that's the idea, that that's what the church has got to offer us for the next millennium, that the notion that we put our faith and our hope and our conviction for the future in the idea of a relationship with God that is based on passivity, that doesn't take account of the language that people use in their everyday lives, that sees mystery as something that is esoteric rather than incarnated in the person of Jesus, which I think is part of the Christian faith. I'd be worried about that.
How is it any less mysterious in the vernacular than in the Tridentine rite?
I think that it is. I don't think it. Well, mystery is mystery. I think the way you celebrate that mystery and the way in which you invite people to it is different. If and it is an observation, and I will stand corrected, but from my observation attending in the Latin Rite, and I certainly felt your participation in the sacrament, the priest had his back to the people, everybody was facing the one direction, and your participation was kind of a sense of being drawn into this mysterious power. In the other Mass, in the Mass that I would attend, the mystery of the sacrifice of Christ is celebrated. And I think people have, and I get a sense at it, they have a much greater sharing in that everybody has a part in it. Now, whether it's just a matter of the way you organise the space, or whether it's a matter of the words that you understand, that's how it seems to me.
Padre Eilish.
Oh, well, I would say to that is that at any Tridentine Mass I attend, that I do feel drawn in, and I do feel I'm participating. And not only that, an interesting apropos of Father Cassin's remarks about ecumenism, there are two sides of ecumenism. There's also the Orthodox and Eastern Christianity, which is a lot more similar to the Tridentine Mass in its worship than to the Novus Ordo Mass. And again, they've got the same orientation of the priest, the same emphasis on the sacral language, and likewise, although I have no Greek, I do have Latin. Likewise, I get drawn into the Divine Liturgy when it's celebrated. But my preference is for the Western Latin Mass, which we call the Tridentine Mass.
But I would worry, sorry Vince, but I would worry if after 2,000 years of Christianity, that's all we've got to offer.
Well, it did for 2,000 years.
I would like us to have something.
Anne, and to get back to my first point, I said that I wasn't talking about either or.
Sure,
I was talking about both and. And where the choice was offered, people have taken it up.
Yes,
So,
talking of the Greek Orthodox, I
Sean
spent last summer, I went to Mount Athos to do the round of the monasteries that I'd heard about, where the liturgies went on and on and on. I actually came back from there saying, thank God for a shorter Mass where I can understand most of the words and where I can get half of the meaning of it. So I'm saying, I suppose, but Vincent, you're inclined to say, what's wrong with the Latin Mass. I suppose to phrase it in Latin, de gustibus non disputandum.
That's
Translation, please.
Yes.
that settles that.
There's no dispute,
no dispute over tongue. Yes.
Right, thank you.
All right, Kieran Wood, last word for you.
I think the point is that, as Father has said, we're not suggesting that the Tridentine Mass should replace the new Mass. The Catholic Church has a great variety of liturgy in its Eastern and its Western rites. All that those people who go to the Tridentine Mass are saying is, if priests want to say the Mass in that rite and people want to go to it, they should be able to do so. And I think it's important for everybody listening to this programme to realise that this is a Mass which is approved by the Church. The Archbishop of Dublin was in St Aldwyn's last year, and everybody who's listening is welcome to come to the Tridentine Mass.
At 11 o'clock every
Every Sunday
morning
in St Aldwyn's, next to Christ Church.
All right.
That whatever